I remember my father always telling me to be brave and to make sure my mom and sisters had a good laugh every day. That was our responsibility. We had to hold our heads high and work hard for our families to beat the sadness and insecurities that were quickly sweeping the nation. I remember it was a Tuesday night when my father and mother sat me down in the kitchen to help me understand the tragedy that had struck in New York City earlier that day. It was October 24th, 1929, Black Tuesday. This is when the stock market crashed. By October 29th, stock prices decreased and banks started to call for their loans. There is an estimated $30 billion in stock values that disappeared. Due to the stock market crashing, millions of Americans were terrified and concerned for their lives and family. The following year, things began to change drastically. My father was very fortunate, and he was able to keep his job in the fish industry and was able to support our family. But his hours at work started to dwindle, and by December of 1930, he was down to 8 hours a week. I remember thinking how well off we were compared to the other families in the community. On the way to school every morning, we would pass men on the street selling apples for 5 cents apiece, trying to provide for their family. My mother always reminded us of how blessed we were to live in our tiny 2-bedroom log home. She spent hours making it a pleasant place for us to live. Wage income for workers who were lucky enough to have kept their jobs fell almost 43% between 1929 and 1933. It was the worst economic disaster in American history. Many of our friends went hungry, and farm prices fell so drastically that many farmers lost their homes and land. At the height of the Depression in 1933, about 25% of the country's workforce was unemployed. I would listen in on my parents discussing the events that were going on throughout the country. Our local grocery store had been robbed and invaded by frantic, starving people desperate for food to feed their families. My father had turned our city law into a garden that provided my family with enough food for us to get by. It started to occur to me, between what I heard on the radio and the signs on the street, that the American people were very unhappy with President Hoover. On the way to school, we would pass what people called Hoovervilles. They were little towns and homes made up of scrappy material found off the street. Packing crates, abandoned cars, metal plates, and chopped wood. Hoovervilles became a common term for shanty towns and homeless encampments during this tragic time. I heard there were quite a few in Washington state and hundreds throughout the country. Each were due to the housing and unemployment crisis. Many of my friends lost their homes, and many families lost their homes all over America. In 1932, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected president. My mother and father never really discussed the details of politics, but my school teacher wasn't afraid to express her opinion in our new political leader. I learned that he was a man of action, considering that within 100 days of the election, the president, his advisors, and the U.S. Congress passed a package law created to help lift our struggling country out of the Depression. My teacher would explain this new law as the New Deal, which she voiced as a new relationship between American people and the government. Several new federal agencies were being created and estimated to employ thousands of Americans with programs all the way from construction to the arts. I began to gain a new respect for our president, the government, and the American people. It wasn't until 1936 that my father began to receive more paid hours at work. He would leave before the sun came up and arrive home just in time for supper. Despite the efforts of the president and the government, the Depression hung around until 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed and America entered World War II. The war resulted in young men being drafted into military service and the creation of millions of jobs in the defense and war industries. The Great Depression tested the courage and strength of the American people. We emerged as stronger families and as a nation. Through this challenging time, I learned what it means to be truly brave and why hope conquers all fear and insecurity, even in the face of what seems to be imminent hopelessness.